Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Dive Cuts here on Rock M Radio. We are coming to you on Wednesday, June 4. If this voice sounds familiar, unsure, also sort of scared, it's probably because it is. And I'm Matt Harris, and I'm the one that has been tasked with building the plane as we fly it tonight on our next episode as we begin what typifies the slow season in college basketball. I'm joined tonight by the other guy with my name, Matt Watkins. We are going to try and, I think, find some subject material to cover tonight. But Matt, how are you doing? I saw that there were some boomers today in the St. Louis metro area, but it seems like your internet connection is fine, and you're going to tolerate me for 30 to 45 minutes.
Yeah, doing good. We've got some lingering rain around here, but not too bad. Ever since they replaced the wooden poles for electricity, the electrical lines, it's with some new metal ones. They've been much better about keeping the electricity. So knock on wood on that. But yeah, no issues today.
I was going to say that you and I were talking before we got started tonight. We were kind of running through, what material do we have to cover? And I think we quickly concluded that the calendar is telling us what's out there to cover. It is June 4, as I said in the intro, and this is one of those weird kind of periods in the college basketball calendar where if there's news about your team, you probably don't like it. You're just kind of hoping for it to be like minor scheduling news. Maybe a target on the recruiting board is setting an official visit to you. Anything beyond that, it's probably not ideal. For Missouri's purposes, guys started moving into apartments over the weekend. Summer school started this week in Columbia. Intersession is done. So realistically, June is usually heavily tilted towards strength and conditioning work, individual work. And in the past couple of years, install happens probably, what would you say, like around the first week of July is when they begin doing like committed install work on offense and defense. So the next month realistically is just about initial forays into getting guys ready and in shape, building some early chemistry. But the real work, probably the work that we care about and that's going to manifest on the floor, probably starts next month. It's also on the recruiting trail, kind of a slow time. Grassroots circuits go dormant in June. There are live periods for coaches, but it's usually at high school camps and or elite prospect camps. Like the NBPA Top 100 camp will be this month. Nike Elite 100 will be this month. The Pangos All-American camp is going on right now, but it's not like the traditional sort of stuff that we see where it's like guys show up on a Friday, play 4 games over a weekend and go out. So June is kind of this weird interregnum for where college basketball is. Tonight, we're probably gonna, I think, build on a conversation you and Sam Snelling had a couple weeks ago where you all talked about kind of the state of Missouri's roster after, things have settled this spring. I thought you guys did a pretty good comprehensive job of getting through that. Last week, the NBA draft's withdrawal deadline came and went. And for us, that's probably the most salient bit of news because that means across the SEC, rosters are pretty much locked in. And now you, me, Sam, we're going to spend all summer probably going over these things entirely too deeply. But I thought tonight we could start with kind of a good overarching kind of view on, just the state of the SEC. It doesn't have to be, the same kind of conversations we have with Blake Level or that we're going to have in the fall once we have schedules. But I thought that might be a good place to start. Does that sound like a good one for you?
Let's do it.
I know we have had loose conversations about rosters that we've liked and just sort of the state of play in the league. And I think the one thing that came back to us and that we think maybe is getting kind of ignored nationally is the state of churn in the SEC. I went back and looked at returning production. I do it every spring. This is the first time probably since 2018-19 that we've had such severe turnover in the league. I think when I looked at it today, there are probably 8 or 9 teams that are losing 80+% of production. Missouri is tops in the conference in returning production, but I'm looking at it right now, and we've got 12 teams losing 70% of their production across the board. And so I just wanted to throw it out to you. You look at it from kind of even a time weighted perspective with par, which I'm sure you'll explain to us. But just what were sort of your initial impressions of the state of the league now that rosters are set? What do you think people need to understand about the state of play right now of the SEC?
Yeah, I think there was always going to be, excuse me, always going to be a drop off from this past year. About a month ago, it was looking like it was going to be even more aggressive of a drop off
Yeah.
than it ended up being due to some late returns of players from the NBA draft process, I should say, that we thought may have been going like Otega Owe from Kentucky, Tahad Pettiford, LeBaron Fallon from Alabama. Those types of guys we thought had a chance to go to the NBA, but they ended up coming back, some of which surprisingly.
Yeah.
So that strengthened the league as a whole. But when I went back and looked at numbers, and I'll explain my method to my madness here in just a minute, but when I'm looking at the overall production, both imported and retained via returning players and Division I transfers, this year's looking like it could be a better version of the league 2 or 3 years ago, but not last year. And what I do when I look at this is I've devised something called PAR, which is kind of fitting, since it's points above replacement. And, for our listeners out there, I'm sure a lot of you are baseball fans, and the analytic catch-all measurement in baseball is WAR, wins above replacement. And that catches base running, offense, defense, whatever, and time weights it to say that, the higher the PAR or the WAR, the better the player. And we don't really have that in basketball, and it's kind of impossible to measure defensively, much like baseball. But Evan Maya has a really good BPR measurement, which is a Bayesian performance rating, which does include offense and defense. His only flaw with that, and it's not a flaw for him, but for my purposes, is that it doesn't account for how much time a player spends on the court or how many possessions a player plays. It's a rate-based statistic like batting average. To throw out another baseball example, what would you rather have, a 300 hitter on 200 at-bats or a 300 hitter on 600 at-bats? The one with 600 bats is much more valuable because he can do it over a full season versus potentially a guy who only hits lefties or righties or whatever. So that's kind of what PAR is, and it's a similar system as far as weighting it. The higher the number, the better. But it gives us a scale from year to year, team to team, league to league. And I've used that, and with the SEC this year, I haven't included freshmen yet because they're important, but outside of 5-star freshmen and really not much more than that, it's not going to be a major impact year one. As Mizzou saw with their very good top 5 class last year, that I don't believe anyone was top 9 in minutes, if I remember right, maybe even not top 10. So you're going to get the uber freshmen that are going to come in, and we'll account for those later. But as far as the returning players and the Division I transfers coming into the program are what I looked at. And when you tally all those numbers up, I do think it's probably shaping up to be a little bit better of a league than it was Dennis Gates' first or second year. But I mean, there's just been too much lost as far as production goes from last year to match that. And that's intuitive when you think about it, because the 5th-year transfers are basically gone now. So all of those super seniors that were really booing the SEC last year, like a Janai Broom is perhaps the biggest example. 5th-year player, 3rd-year transfer at Auburn. Even if he had another year of eligibility as a senior this year, he wouldn't be able to exercise that 5th year where he really busted out last year. So anyway, I've got all kinds of data on it. I won't bore you with everything, but we'll talk about a few more specifics. But in general, the SEC is going to be down next year. It's just a matter of what it compares to in the past. And I think it's still going to be a really good league. Probably too early to say for sure, but more like 9, 10 tournament teams, I would guess. Probably not the best regular season ever in modern basketball history in Auburn, and probably not a separate conference tournament and national champion who is also very good. I don't think you're going to see those types of heights at the top, nor will you see the depth of 13, 14 teams who really deserved to be in the SEC and would have been had they been playing in any other league, and not taking on conference losses because someone has to lose.
And I think it's important basically for us to establish that the league is about ready to retrench towards probably going to get back 3 or 4 spots. The quality and the overall depth of the league is probably going to take a hit. And I think why that matters is you and I have had the conversation that we're not sure that like that new reality has dawned maybe on national voices who are looking at these rosters and ranking them in way too early polls. I look at way too early polls not as a scientific exercise. I think you and I have concluded and pretty much agree that if anything, it's a ranking of coaches as much as it is a ranking of rosters. Like if you look at way too early polls right now, Auburn, for example, is coming in at around number 15. That's about its median in the poll. But if you look at where Auburn's returning production is, it's 12th in the SEC. They have lost, on average, across every statistical category, about 85% of their production. They were dead last before Tahad Pettiford came back. Now, you can like what they did in the transfer portal, but is that a team that, you know, you feel like with one returning NBA draft pick and, you know, a big like a Sean Murphy, who was a good big, who was a solid SEC big. But if you look at his BPR or even his PAR, he's a third of the player that Janai Broom is. Kevin Overton, a very, very good reserve player at Texas Tech, is going to come in and probably be their starting combo guard. We liked him as a potential guy Missouri should pursue as a depth piece at the 2 or the 3 spot. He will probably start for Auburn. You look at Keshawn Hall, who is getting all kinds of love. He's one of the leading scorers in the Big 12. You look at Keshawn Hall, every team he's played on has been worse. Their net rating is worse when he is on the floor. He scores a lot, but he does not necessarily affect winning. And then they went out and they got a 4-man from Europe. We don't know how that's going to translate. They have a really, really, you know, prolific bucket getter from JUCO and Abdul Bashir. And then they went and got Elijah Freeman from Lincoln Memorial, a D2 school. He was popping on some NBA draft radars, but you can kind of view Bashir and Freeman as, you know, proxies for Chaney Johnson and Chad Baker-Mazar, who each needed a little bit of lag time. So when you look at Auburn's roster, this is not me saying Auburn's going to be crap. This is me saying Auburn's getting a lot of bankable credit from what they did last year. But when you really look at the pieces on that roster, Tahad Pettiford is very good. The rest of those guys are very good. And I looked at your PAR. I think PAR has them probably closer to middle of the pack at this point. So
I think on with just the returners and the transfers, which again doesn't account for the JUCO player, the foreign player, and the Division II player, because we don't have numbers on that. So we'll get that later in the summer. So they're going to rise, but right now they're 14th.
Yeah. And if you were to look at them if you just went through and you looked at them with PAR, Torvik, and returning production, and you kind of average those out and you weight them a little bit, they're looking at about 11 or 12. Now, admittedly, we again have to factor in some of those other guys, but 11th or 12th in the SEC is vastly different from top 15 nationally. Now, which is where we come back to pundits are going to say, we trust Bruce Pearl to figure this out. Doubting Bruce Pearl is very silly. Bruce Pearl generally figures things out, finds a way to get teams to play top 20 defense. We'll probably have them in the mix or a tournament bid. So I think that's Auburn to me is sort of this Rorschach test for the perception of what the league is versus I think what we think the reality is with roster turnover is there are very good coaches. They're getting a lot of bankable credit from what happened last year. But when you really dig into the rosters, we think that there's probably at minimum, you and I think that there's probably some depth issues across the league that people haven't quite accounted for yet. So I think I picked Auburn not to pick on them because I think more so they're a good place to ground our conversation between what the perception of the league right now is and what the reality of it is. So I was going to say, when you've looked up and down these rosters, What are some who are some teams that you think maybe outperformed what perceptions of them are at this point? I have my ideas, but I'm curious. You've heard me give
Which
my
teams I
ideas to
think
you in
will be
private. Better
which
than
teams I think are going to be better than what the pundits think.
yeah,
You know, I think personally that excuse me, the national media has it right where Florida and Kentucky are probably your top two
I agree.
teams right now.
I agree.
That's what the public believes, that's what the pundits believe, and the numbers probably back that up.
They do.
And that's before we even throw the freshmen for Kentucky, which they're bringing in 2 5-star freshmen, and they're not included in this. I think they are probably heads and shoulders above the rest, especially with Oweh returning for
Big
for
for them.
Kentucky. But when you
Massive.
drop down the next level, I mean, I've got Tennessee, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th right now, which doesn't include a 5-star freshman. They'll probably rise a little bit, but that's a big step back from a team that's typically top 5 in metric rankings year in, year out. I think they'll probably be pushing for the top 4, but I don't think they're banked on it. Like this year, I think it was almost a deadlock that they're going to be up that high, even though some of the numbers didn't love them, including mine. But when you realize that you had Zakai Ziegler coming back, who is arguably, if not the second most valuable player in the conference behind Broome, that's a team I could see maybe being a little bit lower on. I think Ole Miss right now, I don't know that they're getting a lot of love, but the numbers don't like what they're doing so much. Alabama is another team that I think is very similar to Auburn, that they're getting a lot of credit for what they have been. I mean, their recruiting class, their transfer class is just not that impressive. What they brought in this spring, getting Phelan back is big because they weren't bringing back a whole lot else. And he really buoys some of those numbers. But I mean, I have them kind of where we're talking about Auburn, 10th.
Middle of the package,
But when we're talking about the other side of some teams, and we'll set Mizzou aside, to obviate any homer allegations here. I think Mississippi State is a really interesting team. They got Josh Hubbard back. They just seemingly keep adding guys out of nowhere. Acor, which he played at or supposed to play at Kansas State last year, played at Samford the year before with ATM or Texas A&M's new coach. But I think they are a team that could surprise some people. And by surprise, I mean do better than 8 and 10, which they've done every year under Chris Jans. I don't know that they're good enough to really press for a conference championship, but the numbers like them. Vanderbilt, surprisingly, brings back top 4 production in the league, which if you follow it closely, then you'd know that. But Devin McLaughlin is a really, really good player, very similar to Mark Mitchell in terms of impact. Tyler Nickel, and then Tyler Tanner, a very good freshman. They're all back. I think they're going to be a team, and they brought in a good transfer class too, not an elite one, but a good one. I think they're going to be towards the top of the league, certainly top half. Texas A&M is really an interesting case.
They're going to be a fun one.
I think they are just Vanderbilt a year later. Everything that they're bringing in is transfers. They do not have any retained players whatsoever.
They have one freshman. One.
And teams like that tend to be good, but not great. We saw it with Dennis Gates' first year, and he kept Kobe Brown, which was big. We saw it with Vanderbilt last year. These really heavy transfer classes. Even Kentucky last year was a really good team, but they weren't great. And granted, the league was really tough, but these teams with huge transfer classes, they typically don't see the returns from a big incoming transfer class, a great transfer class, as you see from a great returning core. There's usually a lag between the performance, and that's intuitive. When you think about it, guys who are in the system for multiple years are going to improve at a greater rate than a all-star team of guys who've never played together before. So that's a really interesting one. Texas A&M really has my interest. Georgia they didn't do anything great, but they didn't do anything bad. I have them right there in the middle. A top half team, which I wouldn't think that, but I think that they did enough, and Texas is kind of in
Yeah,
that same realm there.
yeah.
But yeah, those are a couple teams I think.
I think I put this out to you today. Like I think I put the hypothetical of you could take Auburn's core, you could take Texas A&M's core, or you could take Vanderbilt's core. And I think you and I both said if you just looked at the top 5 guys in lineups, we would take Texas A&M. I mean, they bring in Pop
Mhm.
Isaacs, a very, very good point guard. Jakari Lane, who undersized, very small, but prolific, very efficient player out of North Alabama.
I think he
They
played at
bring,
Kobe Brown's high school for it might have
yeah,
been for his
he's a
dad.
Huntsville
I don't
native.
know.
He's a Huntsville
Yeah.
native. Very efficient player. That'll be a nice compliment to Pop. They bring in Rylan Griffin as a floor spacer. Mackenzie Mbako, who was one of those stay go decisions, frankly. I
Mhm.
mean, little bit flaky with Mike Woodson, but we that's Mike Woodson. I'm going to pin Mike Woodson most of the culpability for why McKenzie wasn't exactly great or all that steady for them at times, but played exceptionally well in scrimmages there. Oozes talent, was a former 5-star kid. And then Federico, rim protector, rebounder. So you have 2 veteran ball handlers, top end floor spacer, multifaceted stretch 4, and a rim running big who can swat shots.
Mhm.
That's a pretty good starting 5. Now, A&M is going to have questions about its depth, but Auburn will have questions about its depth.
Mhm.
There's not an elite point guard there in A&M that Auburn has, but you look up and down the balance of the lineup, feel like a team like A&M probably has comparable balance there. Even a team like Vanderbilt, who I think you and I feel like Mark Byington's not getting enough credit for the work he did last year
For
in the
sure.
portal. Now, it hurt that Jason Edwards bailed on them. Hurt that Jalen Carey got pilfered by Rick Barnes in Knoxville.
That's a good
But
fit though.
it is that he fits very well in Knoxville. But Devin McLaughlin, a guy who we really liked in the portal, a guy that we
Mhm.
really liked for them last year, kind of a criminally underrated guy, not like a alpha guy, but just does so many different things, is versatile inside out for them, can roll, can cut, can pick and pop a little bit, can post up smaller guards if he gets a mismatch, just does a ton of different things in that system for them to exploit spacing. Frankie Collins is a replacement level point guard, but he gets 2 feet in the paint, can collapse a defense and move the ball. Jalen Washington, we were dubious on him. He's got a ceiling. He's a roller and cutter, but they've got Tyler Tanner, who I thought played really well, who they can use
He's
as a
good.
secondary handler.
Mhm.
Nichols, a great shooter, particularly off movement. You look at their starting 5 of, Collins, you put in Tyler Nickel on the wing, McLaughlin, Washington. You got to find a secondary handler. Tyler Harris, a guy who played pretty well at
Mhm.
Washington last year, is a big wing for them. A.K.A. Okikri is another kind of combo forward out of Cornell. They went back to the Ivy. That guy's kind of a good rim runner and finisher.
Cornell too.
Yeah, Chris Mannion.
Yep.
They went back and got another guy there. Like, you just look, there's not maybe the same top end pieces, but I think they've got the depth that maybe a team like A&M or Auburn doesn't quite have.
Mhm.
And so I think when you really, this gets back to earlier point, once you really start digging into rosters, you can say, okay, if Byington did this with a deep group last year, do we think he can do it again? Do we think that he can find another level from McLaughlin? Does he think he can find another level from Nickel? Are they going to get some, bonuses from having a little bit more continuity than they did a year ago? That was sort of the upside we liked about that roster last year, was they thought they might have some of that. So I think this is, again, not us dumping on Auburn. It's us saying, once you really start going through some of these rosters and you start looking at the depth and the way some of these pieces are constructed, there's some teams that I think have navigated the portal in a way that have been really creative, really thoughtful, that aren't maybe getting kind of the love that they should be getting right now. I think Georgia's a team that one I've got to overcome my bias for Mike White about, but they went out and they got a really good freshman point guard. Jeremiah Wilkinson was very, very good last year for Cal. We saw him, do some good stuff when they came to Columbia. He
Mhm.
played pretty well when Cal, built a first half lead against Missouri. Blue Kane has kind of become a nice catch-all replacement wing for them. We liked Santo Cyril as a guy who, if he went in the portal, we would have loved to see Missouri get on, a big physical defender, rim runner, catches lobs, snatches anything around the vicinity of the rim. They've got, Justin Abson, who is going to be a workman-like 4 or 5 man for you, can play in some small ball lineups. They've got some pieces that are interesting there. We liked some of their transfer point guards as well that they got out of the portal. So is it enough to push to the top 4? No, but they've got some interesting pieces. And that's, I think, the biggest thing I take away here is it feels like we have people who are saying, well, we've expected Alabama to always be good. Auburn's always good. Tennessee's bankable. But then you really start looking at some of these rosters and you go, this isn't the same kind of Alabama freshman class. It's not the same kind of Alabama transfer class that we've seen in recent years. So I think that's going to be sort of the interesting facet here. And on Missouri's part, we think Missouri's done enough to retain. You guys sort of felt that Missouri has done enough to at least hold the line. Maybe there wasn't enough that Missouri did to kind of capitalize on the void here, but Missouri's done enough to where I think, they should feel pretty good about being top 6, top 7 in the league. But Missouri didn't play well to end the year, so that takes a little bit of the wind out of their sails. It's hard to put them in maybe that sort of same class as a Tennessee or maybe even a Texas at this point. So I was going to say, are there any trends that you saw from roster construction that you think are pretty notable? I think you and I have talked a lot about the portal really, really felt like it took a dramatic step back this year. And I think people have treated the portal like it's the portal. There's all these goodies. Look at these shiny objects. And when you and I look at the BPRs for these portals, we look at the par ratings for some of these guys. I think you and I would agree. There's probably 20 to 30 top end pieces that weren't in the mix this year. And so a number 20 recruit this year in the portal rankings might have been closer to 50 or 60 a year ago. It just feels like we've treated the portal like there's all these great and awesome pieces sitting there. And it's just like, the fifth years are gone. I
do think there was definitely some of that. I can't really quantify it on a number basis on like what was lost without the fifth years. But I mean, when you looked at the seniors, and I think Evan Maya had actually put this out, something like 50 to 60% of his top 100 were seniors. Which is either fourth or fifth or beyond year seniors. But now that you're hemmed into fourth year seniors, those juniors, sophomores, and freshmen are going to become a lot more important than they used to be. So it's not just the ability to have as many 24 and 25-year-olds as possible on the roster now, because you can't really do that. Those are still around, like a Jacob Cruz, who has the JUCO exception, Chad Baker-Mazara, who, what did he go to, USC or something? Yeah. Same thing with him. But, the typical fifth-year players, they're gone. A Janai Broom, he's gone. And everyone like him, that's no longer available. Otherwise, Tamar Bates would be around next year. He's in the first class of freshmen that do not have that available to him. So we're finally past that for the most part. And I do think it's not so much a lack of top end available. It was more a lack of total players available. Yeah. And increasing prices. It's not only, hey, we need 5 guys and we want them all to be good. It's like, we can't afford 5 good players. Not many teams can at this point in the game. Sure, there's a couple out there, like K-State's going to pay whoever how much ever, and they're going to end at 500. And that's fine if that's what you want to do. But for the most part, you're pretty much locked into getting 1 or 2 really good players out of the portal and then filling in with depth. And that's a good case scenario. What really intrigues me of all this is going back and looking at all this spring, the 2 biggest things, at least from my study, that were important were the overall total par on your team projected from the prior year, but also point 2, part and parcel with that, is returning par. Those teams cluster around the top. The teams with high overall par and high transfer par, they tend to cluster around the middle. And it's not just what production you have coming in, it's where it came from. Is it a guy you just brought in from the portal this year? Is it a guy you've been coaching 2 or 3 years? And Tennessee was a master of that. And as I go back and look at this every year, they were at the top nearly every year of returning production and overall production. And guess what? They keep churning out top 5, top 10 seasons. That's how they did it. Alabama to some extent, Auburn last year, Florida last year, they were all tops in returning production. You look at Auburn, they brought in one impact transfer last year in Miles Kelly. Florida brought in one impact transfer last year in Elijah Martin. The rest were returning players. They were good players that were returning, but you want to be at the top of that.
And this is, I think the one thing I look at as well too is if you go through every round of the NCAA tournament and you can't really control for a bunch of other exogenous variables and the correlations are weak at times, but anecdotally, when you begin to look at the average rank for a team's continuity, which is how many minutes carry over from year to year at each position, the rankings get better with every round you go. Basically, if you are inside the Sweet 16, most of those teams are inside the top 100 to top 120 in continuity.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they're just old. It's not that they're it's also not that they're very, talented. They've built a core of 5 to 6 guys that have been together over multiple seasons. And Tennessee's a great example. They will build guys that have been together 3 or 4 years, and then they'll go get one elite transfer. They'll go get a Chaz Lanier, or they'll get a Dalton Connect, or, this year they're going to go get a Jacoby Gillespie. They'll get one guy to fill an acute need in that rotation. But the reason why they can go get that guy is because Rick Barnes knows in October when he brings his team together, I'm losing so-and-so in March. And when March gets here, I have to go target this guy in the portal. I will have this amount of money to spend, and I can go get that guy, and I don't have to mess around. And that is good roster construction. Florida, in a lot of the same ways, you bring up Florida. Florida is fantastic because people talk about, look at where all the transfers came from. Walter Clayton was a freshman when he got there. He had been a freshman at Iona. He spent 3 years in that program. Same thing with Will Richard. We liked Will Richard as a freshman coming out of Belmont and Dennis's first year. I remember we loved Will Richard's data profile. He's a transfer. He's been there 3 years. Micah Handlickton was in his second year in the program when he came back from injury. The guys that they bring in are transfers, but they're multi-year transfers that then spend 2-3 years being inculcated in that system. So what happens over time is everyone thinks, let's go in the portal, let's get transfers. Maybe one team a year will make a deep run, with a transfer heavy roster. But you look at the last rounds, it's teams that have cores of 5 to 6 guys. Maybe they came in as freshmen. Maybe they came in as multi-year transfers. Transfers multiple years left, but they have been a core that's grown together. And so when we look at roster construction and bringing us back to the point for SEC rankings this year and how we assess sort of how things work, you look at Missouri as a team that's probably going to bring back guys who've been together multiple years. Stunningly, Arkansas will be a team that's going to probably have more continuity than we've ever seen from a John Calipari team. And they're going to be second in returning production. Florida lost its entire starting backcourt, but it didn't lose anything out of its front court. So it's going to have a ton of continuity again. Vanderbilt will have some continuity, probably less so than others, but you can begin to see the teams that are going to bring back not just minutes, not just veterans, but guys who've been together 2-3 seasons. So those are the things that we tend to look for, I think, when we begin sort of saying, okay, who could make a push here? Kentucky will be interesting. Kentucky, I think, is going to have a ton of talent. They've done a great job in the portal the last 2 years. Keeping Owe was a big one. Maybe Kentucky bucks that trend this year and contends with a mostly transfer reconstituted roster, but we'll see. Which I think leads in kind of the broader discussion here about you and I have had, which is this is not a knock on transfers. It's not a knock on, Rick Pitino, who's a very good coach. It's not a knock on teams that are throwing a lot of money around in the portal this year. But I think philosophically, you and I feel like shiny objects have sort of overrode the time-tested methods of building rosters here, which is you can't ignore high school recruiting entirely. You can't ignore development entirely. There are no hacks to the system. Teams that win in March are still built the way they were built 10 years ago, still built the way 20 years ago. Recruit, retain, develop. And I still think even after all the fifth years have gone, teams that recruited, retained, and developed were still the ones that usually cut nets down. To me, that was the biggest stress test that model has ever faced. And the continuity rankings prove it. The results at the Final Four prove it. It's tempting to say it's JUCO recruiting all the time. It's flip every year. Teams that win still find a way to keep their groups together. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that comes out to me as we get through the end of this, as we get done with sort of the reconstruction season across the sport.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you're never really going to be entirely divorced from being a sport where if you bring in good players and you keep them around, that's never going to fall out of favor. It's always going to work because that's how teams have won for many, many years. And that's how teams are still winning now. You know, you definitely do like the transfer portal for some things, but I think that the thing that I've come to not appreciate so much about it is that when you're going out hunting for a player, and this proves out data at large, 500 plus sample size, that when you're bringing in a guy, his impact for your team is roughly what he had at the last place. You know,
he's topped his skill curve.
Yeah, you're paying for what the guy did last year, and that's probably what he's going to do next year. Whereas you have a guy like Anthony Robinson, a wild, crazy outlier example. Did anyone expect for him to be a pretty poor player as a freshman? I mean, if we're being totally honest, certainly poor in terms of impact. To be a top 20 player in the SEC last year? We thought he was going to be better, but if we're being honest, in a historically elite SEC squad season, did anyone think that he was going to be amongst the elite? I certainly didn't. Certainly not offensively. You know, and those are the types of things that you don't really get that often with transfers. You know, sure, if you get a freshman transfer that comes over and as a sophomore and it was a completely terrible fit and he pops, that's not too surprising. Maybe some sophomores, but when you get up to juniors and seniors, you're getting the guy who they already are. You know, and you may have some tweaks here and there to make them a little bit more efficient, whatever. But by and large, you're importing the same guy. Whereas with development, it's not that way. And I think we need to kind of like disavow the notion now that development doesn't matter. It still does. I mean, the last 3 years, I've spent the last month looking at this. Players within a system or within a program improve more year over year than transfers do coming in.
Yep.
It's just the facts, you know, and if you want to argue that, that's fine. I'm not saying you, but anyone, it's just wrong that players within a program that are returning year after year improve more than those who come in for a 1-year transfer. That's the way it is.
The best example I have is a guy like Honor Batang, who was buried behind 2 multi-year transfers last year. If you go look at, and I wrote about this last month, if you go look at Honor's minutes and kind of what his production was, it was not completely out of line for what a freshman would be stacked behind 2 vets. If you look at, what he will project to be next year, it's probably 8 points, 4 or 5 rebounds, 1.3 assists, and about 20 minutes a game. That's probably, historically, if we use prospective data and we look back at guys with his similar composite rating, position, same kind of minute and usage profile as freshmen, and what they did as sophomores, it's 8 points, 4.5 rebounds, 1.3 assists. Guess who that's awfully comparable to? Mr. Tony Perkins. Now, is that going to make Mizzou fans happy? No. I will tell you right now, the data says that if he averages more than 10 points a game, he's going to be an outlier example. But to our discussion, you could pay close to 7 figures to go get Tony Perkins from the portal, or you can recruit Honor Batang. You can have him spend 2 years in your system and develop. And if he pops next year, you're getting probably that surplus value from him on a lower dollar amount. Oh, and you still have player control for multiple years. And you took the cost savings from not having to go buy a Tony Perkins, and you can use it somewhere else on your roster. That's what we used to do. We used to develop guys and bring them in and be okay with them becoming depth pieces and, filling in your wing rotation. That's what it looks like if Honor Batang averages 8 points, 4 boards, and an assist. He will be exactly what Tony Perkins was last year, and Tony Perkins was the 6th guy in the rotation last year. And you'll have gotten it completely out of development. Anything beyond that is a win, and you got it for a cheaper price. To me, that's where recruit, retain, develop matters. And if he's at that level, you're probably not going to see him go to the NBA draft. So as a junior, he'll probably peak. And at that point, he will hopefully have been with a core of guys for multiple years. And now you've got a team that can make deep runs. That's what we talk about here. We talk about incremental development. We talk about looking at skill curves. When you bring in a guy like a Jaden Stone, maybe he pops, but you're having to deal with him scaling up a league, playing on a much better roster. You're paying for production that came for a really bad team. We know that tends to result in guys who are 7th, 8th, 9th in the rotation. Was that worth using that slot versus going out and getting a transfer who had multiple years left in developing him? So I think that's where you and I sort of come down on this is, I think you put it best. Any guy that's in the second year with you and that's in his second year in the program is probably better or equal to a guy who's only going to spend 1 year with you. It's going to work out that way. And I think the other facet that we can talk about, and I think we saw this spring, was unless you are willing to pay $2-3 million for guys at the top of that spectrum, you're not buying guys that are going to be better than what you're going to get with in-house development. And Missouri has certainly shown that it is leery to go in that 7-figure dollar range or go much above that. So Missouri's own sort of parameters for how it shops means that it's not going to buy players that are heads and shoulders above what they could develop in-house. So that, for us, I think that's the thing we've got to get back to, is we've got to dismiss this idea that high school recruiting doesn't matter anymore, because there are going to be some teams this year, to bring it back again to the SEC and kind of the roster construction, that have 3 or 4 spots vacant. That used to be freshmen and sophomores. That used to be the guys you developed. And those were your lotto tickets that you would see if 1 or 2 of them hit to fill in your rotation. Now those guys don't exist and they're not there. So I think that's the downstream consequence of being all in on portal stuff as well. But you can disabuse me of that idea too if you think that that's overstating the case.
No, I think it's right. We've talked about this also, but I think the smart way to do things is still to build your program through high school recruiting. Use the transfer portal in an advantageous way to get multi-year transfers that allow you the ability to bring in guys who you didn't have access to for whatever reason after their freshman year, and still be able to develop them in the same way as you would a freshman. And then in the case of an emergency, or that, you had 2 guys go to the NBA draft, whatever, that were not expected, say Anthony Robinson had the breakout this year that he had, but he was a little bit better.
Yeah.
And he pops the NBA. You didn't expect that to happen. Okay, then you can go get a 1-year transfer to fill in that spot. But that's how I think you need to kind of use the upper levels of the transfer portal when it comes to rental players, is only to plug in holes.
Yeah. You're not, especially if you're a program like Missouri, and you've shown that you're willing, and I think Missouri's been smart and willing to spend on guys like a Tamar Bates, a Mark Mitchell, Caleb Grill, guys that had multiple years. That's where I think you're smart to invest. That's why I would have been interested to go call Curtis Gibbons, a guy that they recruited out of high school from LSU. Not a great year at LSU, but was a good player. Maybe that's a guy that I would have gone and called, because, to your point, He's got SEC experience. He's been in an SEC program for a year. Maybe you only keep him for a year. Maybe it doesn't work, but if you get that sophomore gain from him, it's going to be better than what you would have gotten by just going out and getting a transfer. So, and it's probably why Sebastian Mack was a guy we loved, aside from the analytic profile, was Missouri potentially gets 2 more years of him. So that's a clear win if you're looking to put money into a player at that point. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you think we need to talk about, kind of whether it's SEC roster flipping related or kind of the tactics of roster flipping? I think we've kind of covered everything. We're at 45 minutes, but I didn't know if there was anything that you felt like we had sort of omitted at this point.
No, I think that hits the high notes. We've got a lot more over on Rockium Plus for anyone who wants to read more about the data and get into the details. But yeah, we've got all kinds of stuff over there on this point. So come check it out if you haven't already.
Before we get out of here, we'll do a quick run through on roster construction related matters, and that's recruiting. I just said that it's kind of a slow time this month for us to at least watch guys. I'm coming back off vacation, so I'm still working back through game film from the last couple of recruiting sessions or live period sessions. Coaches were out the third week of May. Missouri was in Memphis watching guys at the Nike event. They were in Wichita watching them at the Puma Pro event. Tony Bryant and Aiden Chronister, 2 targets in 2026, played there. They were in Memphis watching 2 guys with Mocan Elite, Terrace Reed and Ethan Taylor, a guy the latter of whom I think is close to maybe garnering some major attention. He played well last weekend at a stop in Kansas City, which coaches couldn't be at that one, but there's all kinds of film and they always sort of know what's going on at those events. So those were kind of at a little bit of a lull there. Missouri has tried to reset the wing board a little bit in the last month. Obviously, J.J. Andrews going off the board to Arkansas was a bit of a blow. They have thrown out a trio of offers. One's to a kid, Billy White, the third out of Texas. He is probably not going to be much in play. He's already setting like 3 or 4 official visits. Doesn't appear there's much traction there. The guys that I'm monitoring are Bryson Howard, who's really blown up in the past month. He's gone from unranked to probably like a top 50 level kid. He's Josh Howard's son. Josh Howard played for the Dallas Mavericks. Bryson Howard is from the Dallas area. Lots of Texas schools are jumping into his recruitment. And the other wing they offered was Terrace Bowie, who is out of Charlotte, who runs with Team Thad, a Memphis-based team on the EYBL. A little bit more of a projectable guy, 6'6", really lean, but very twitchy, very athletic. Needs to fill in the skill piece, but if you believe that Missouri recruits long, athletic dudes who are aggressive on defense, Terrace Bowie fits that mold. And this month, I'll probably spend some time going back through the 2027 class and looking over guys there. The priorities there are known. Scotty Atkinson, Chase Branham, Jimmy McKinney III is also on the board there. There are also some guys that, I think they've tossed out some offers to, or that they've kind of tracked a little bit. But nothing to the extent that I would say that really pushes those top 3 at this point. Nasir Anderson and Jarvis Hayes have mentioned Missouri being in their recruitments, but we'll see how serious that gets. Otherwise, we're going to wait and kind of see whether visits get announced for fall. We know that Aiden Chronister will be on campus in September. We know Tony Bryant will be on campus in September. The guy I would watch is Ethan Taylor. He's a 7-footer out of Shawnee Mission Northwest on the Kansas side of the border in the KC Metro. He has really played well over the past couple weeks. He started to get offers from the likes of Baylor, Texas, Houston. Kansas may be ramping up their recruitment after offering him. Missouri and OU had kind of had Taylor to themselves for a while, but he's played well enough now that you're starting to see some bigger names move in. He is probably going to move up from its 50th in the composite, probably maybe push the mid-30s if you believe kind of what recruiting writers are saying. So that's where we are on that front. Watkins, I know you would love to take 3 or 4 of these guys this
Every
fall.
year.
Every year, 3 or 4.
Just get them in the system and start that clock going and just churn them out.
Just churn them out. So we've had some stuff over on Rock M Plus. I did kind of a usage constellation, which is basically we take um, the average possessions and average efficiency for every guy on all 4 grassroots circuits. That's a sample of 1,500 players, and then we look at the medians, and then we look at where Missouri targets land, sort of in that constellation. Spoiler: a lot of Missouri's targets are very, very efficient on high usage. So the 2026 class is looking, I think, probably better than the 2025 class. That group was one that I think really struggled to sort of maintain its stock. This one's looking like it's probably going to wind up elevating its stock. And in 2027, Scotty Atkinson and Chase Brannon are guys that I think fans are going to love. The efficiency numbers love them. The tape looks fantastic on them. If you're Missouri, it's pretty clear why the board is only 10 offers in 2027, because you may not have to look outside the state to find the key pickups. So I'm running through those kinds of updates periodically over on our board. Sometimes there's video, sometimes there are charts and whatnot, but we've got probably 3 or 4 threads where I've tried to update folks kind of on how targets are playing at this point. So come on over there. Come on over to see Watkins Fun with Par. Come on over to see if Sam still wants to join us or if he's busy trying to keep the website running. Watkins, have I neglected anything in this kind of shambolic job hosting?
2 things, two newsworthy, noteworthy, newsworthy, whatever you want to say. Items that we have not yet discussed. Mizzou's non-conference schedule is growing. They've announced dates with Howard on the road, Virginia Military Academy at home, and Bethune-Cookman also at home. And today it was announced that Mizzou will be playing Kansas on Sunday, December 7th in Kansas City. So those are your scheduling updates. And then perhaps something that we've neglected and we shouldn't have, because our commander-in-chief over here, Sam Snelling, was actually the one to break the information that Mizzou was heavily involved in getting Tim Fuller on board. And this was several months back. That came to fruition, and Mr. Fuller is headed back to Columbia, Missouri as the new general manager of the basketball program.
I was going to let Sam take kind of the victory lap and announce on that. What are your initial thoughts on going that route? I know on the board we had talked kind of about different skill sets that we would want in a potential GM. So I'll let you take the floor. What's sort of your initial appraisal of the hire?
Yeah, I don't want to get too deep on it here since we're running out of time, but I think it's a good move. Having someone who has a knowledge of the industry, and few have the knowledge of the industry that Tim Fuller does. He got into a little bit of hot water. It happens. I mean, we all love Norm Stewart. You don't think he got into some hot water a few times? Okay. I have no problems with that. I think his connections throughout the industry, both working on the prep circuit with Overtime Elites, with Nike in college as an assistant coach, I believe at Louisville, Missouri, Providence, and probably a few others I'm missing.
Wake Forest too.
Wake Forest, where he, I believe, thanks to one of our very adept subscribers today, noticed that he played at Wake Forest at the same time as Josh Howard, who we were just talking about a few minutes ago. Not saying that it's going to mean anything, but not saying it doesn't. Who's the father of Bryson Howard, who we were talking about. When you are around that long, you have connections. When you do this for that long, you have connections. And this, I think, is a job about having connections and building them and maintaining them, and most importantly, leveraging them. So, if nothing else, if Dennis Gates effectively hired another recruiter, even though he's not officially a recruiter, that's not a bad thing. Especially when you're wanting to build through the high school ranks. I think that's a good thing. So I'll just leave it there. I'll let you have the final word on that, and we'll call it a wrap.
It's a diverse CV. I think you have a coach who understands kind of the needs in eval scouting side, and is going to be able to have conversations with the staff and with Dennis in a familiar way. And he's also going to understand kind of what a head coach is going to want in terms of deliverables. I think the thing that we've always talked about that's hard with portal season is there's so many. It's an entire all hands effort that you're getting so much intel and input coming in from all different directions that it almost feels like you need kind of a central locus and somebody who can sort of oversee that process. And now that can be Tim. Tim in portal season can be the guy that's going to run that process, is going to be the filtration center, that intel coming in, and can help, I think, provide some organization to what's coming in. So on the portal side, I think that's particularly important because it's not going to feel like every person's sort of siloed. You can hopefully flow some of that information to someone who's got connections. I think the Nike experience is great because that's more like working with on the player side and understanding what their needs are. You're working closer with probably agents and reps, so you have those Rolodexes and those familiar conversations. The talking with an agent, talking through comp, talking through needs is probably a little bit easier. I think the overtime elite stuff is particularly salient because that was having to mix scouting. You had to identify guys you wanted to bring in. You had to work with their camps to sell them on coming to that sort of development system there. So I just think that there's an interesting mix of backgrounds there that is different than just saying, which I think a lot of these GM roles have sort of been early on where let's go hire a recruiting writer that just knows a lot of people and has a deep phone bank and can call and can get stuff in. And it's a little different than going and doing what North Carolina did, which is hiring somebody from the NBA ranks who maybe doesn't have sort of as versed connections across the grassroots world as across, places like Overtime Elite. So I think would I like somebody to come in and maybe have a little bit of cap experience to help Missouri, a team like Missouri, which has to, I think, ride a fine line in terms of how it allocates resources? Sure, but I think I look at Tim's resume and just see a wealth of different experiences. And more importantly, he knows the program he's walking into. There will be relationships that he might have with current donors, longtime boosters. He'll know the people in the building, or he'll know some people in the building. He'll understand where Missouri sort of sits in the spectrum of the sport. And I think that sort of institutional knowledge is also really, really important. So we'll see kind of what the directive is. I thought Eli Hoff had a really, really good piece over at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that if you are subscribed there, I'd recommend you go read. Just good kind of overview on what Tim's thinking to bring to the job. But I think it's an interesting hire, and I'm glad that Sam heard about it first. But that's all I got on that front. We are going to get out of here. We're going to hopefully be back in a couple of weeks. Maybe we'll have something more substantive to talk about. Maybe we'll have more scheduling news. Maybe we'll have more news about official visits. But until then, we are on the forums over at Rock M Plus. If you're not a subscriber, it's $5 a month. You get to come and hang out with us. You get to see all of Matt Watkins' fun data projections. You get me posting entirely to in-depth breakdowns on recruits and all kinds of just fun chatter. It's been really, really healthy conversations over there. We love talking to our readers over there. We're happy to chat about anything that you have, field any questions that are out there. So give us a look, see if you like us. And until next time, we're going to get out of here, and I hope you all have a good rest of the week, and we'll see you later.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. Rock M Radio is the official podcast network of Rock M Plus, a new and exciting subscription service provided by me and the other voices of Rock M Radio. Please take a few moments to head over to rockm.plus and sign up for an account today. The cost is only $5 a month, and the benefits include access to our live podcast, a subscriber-only message board, weekly newsletters, and more. If you enjoyed this episode of Rock M Radio and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, make sure to click the subscribe button below and tell your friends. Our podcast feed is available through the Apple Podcast app for iPhone, Google Podcast app for Android, whatever app you listen to your podcast. You can also find Rock M Radio on Spotify. If you're looking for a podcast about your favorite team that is not the Missouri Tigers, Fan First Sports Network is your answer. A full podcast network loaded with the team-specific podcasts covering Major League Baseball, the NFL, NHL, NBA, MLS, and more. We'll be back with more episodes of Rock M Radio coming to you soon.